Well, if you or your children have ever oohed and awed over pictures of dinosaurs that flew in the air or swam in the sea, you can give thanks to a 12-year-old girl in England in the early 1800s for helping make that happen. Her name was Mary Anning. Mary grew up in a poor working-class family in the south of England. She would go walking along the beach with her dad, who was an amateur fossil hunter. What they would do, this poor family, would go and collect small fossils, go to the edge of the beach and set up a tent or a table and sell them to people who were traveling or tourists walking along the beach to make money, to pay their debts or to supplement her father's wages. He died, and when their family was left alone, Mary took up the tradition of being a fossil hunter. One day, when she was 12 years old, Mary was walking along the beach with her brother Joseph, and they saw a skull slightly protruding from the sand. She got to work with her hands and tools and dug until, after a full day's work, a 5-meter skull coming out of the sand bigger than she was. They were amazed. No one had seen anything like this before, and in the midst of the rubble and the bones she saw before her, she got to work and kept digging. It took Mary months, every day working with her hands to pull out the bones, but once she did, this 12-year-old girl from a poor working-class family in England had unearthed and put together the first full-size skeleton ever found of what we now call an ichthyosaur, an ancient marine reptile from 200 million years ago that swam through the sea, but to them it looked like a monster. The scientific community couldn't agree on what it was, didn't give her credit for her discoveries, but Mary kept working. A few years later, she, along that same beach, with the same tireless effort, was the person who unearthed and dug up the first full skeleton of a plesiosaur. That's the one that looks like a Loch Ness monster. Years after that, she was the first to discover a dinosaur with wings, or a flying reptile with wings, what became called a pterodactyl, and she found the first full skeleton of that creature along the same beach. She had a friend who used to draw sketches of what she described to him from her images in the bones, and some of the first drawings of ancient reptiles and dinosaurs came from that pair. The most unlikely of characters, an uneducated, working-class girl from the south of England, gave rise to one of the most prolific discoveries in paleontology, so much that she was called the princess of paleontology, but should rightly be called the queen. What Mary saw in the bones was magic, and everybody else missed it. She would go walking along that beach in search of the stories of those bones in all kinds of weather, but she particularly liked to walk along the beach after heavy, powerful storms, because they kicked up the sand and the rock, and the bones and debris would be easier to see the specimens. There was no blueprint for her to create these stories from the bones. This was before Darwin had published The Origin of Species. There was no pterodactyl or ichthyosaur or other dinosaur models to build from like you and I would. All she had was the bones, the debris. And what she did was create magic and a beautiful story from them. And this can be true for us too. What do you think you can retell from the bones of a life or a country? What do you think you can see in what other people find to be debris or decay? Can you look in your life and identify the bones and look at them with courage and put them back together in a way that tells a living, adventurous story? Or in a tumultuous, polarized time in our country where it feels like there is debris everywhere, will we take those pieces and put them back together in a way that makes magic or just feels like dead bones? One of my favorite teachers of spirituality in the Bible is a man named Rob Bell. He's a former megachurch pastor who's now taken a different tone in life with books and podcasts and speaking tours. And in his book on the Bible, he lifts up this little Greek word that for him means everything. In the book of Ephesians, the writer Paul says that what God is doing in the word is this Greek word called anakephalaiosis. Basically, it means retelling the world over and over. The idea is that no matter what has happened in our life or our country or our community, no matter our suffering, our pain, our alienation, a God of love is retelling us and retelling the story of the world over and over, picking up the pieces, putting them back together again, and having a story that looks like redemption and love and courage and magic. The way that Rob Bell describes it is saying that sometimes the worst parts of our lives become the most transformative. His example is going on a bad camping trip and describing it later to friends at a dinner party. He says, think of the kind of camping trip where you go and you discover midway through that there's a hole in the tent, and it rains all night, and the stove that you brought to make the food doesn't work, and you're eating cold food out of the can, and in the middle of the night, raccoons come and they destroy everything in your campsite and leave you with trash, and you wake up cold and hungry and angry and tired. In the moment, you're not laughing. But he says when you retell that story to friends and families later, not only do you not omit the hard moments, you lift them up. You relish them and talk about how you overcame the cold and the wind and the rain and the trash and the hunger. You retell that story with a kind of redemption and purpose. Sometimes the hard parts become the best parts. And that doesn't mean the hard parts of our lives that we didn't ask for are the best parts. Not always. But it does mean that when we retell the story of our lives or the lives of a country or a family, sometimes the hard parts, the broken parts, the bone and debris can be put back together in a transformative way. But it requires a sense of adventure and curiosity about what's possible. No blueprint, no instructions, but the notion that the bones can be put back together in a magical way. As a country right now, we're grappling with polarized sides fighting for the future of a nation. We look at institutions that used to be trusted, feeling at times like they're decaying. We have a vision of the past or a vision of the future, and however we vote, often we're so certain that the vision for the future of the country that we want is exactly the way that I want it to be. But I can speak from my own experience that I am losing a sense of curiosity and adventure about democracy and those who vote differently than I do. I'm not curious about their motivations, and this moment does not feel like an adventure. I crave the certainty of a more stable world, but it has never been that way. A good world, a living country, a democracy is not put together by people who know what the end product is going to be like. There's not a blueprint for what love and justice look like when practiced in the world. It's put together bone by bone by people with a curiosity and wonder to create a more magical and real world together. When you ask yourself who you want to lead you, whether that's in a classroom or a church or a city or a family or a nation or a mentor, who you want to lead you should be a person of deep curiosity and adventure. Not a person who's certain that they have all the answers. In the poem of Whitman, not a tyrant, not necessarily the educated, but people who are convinced their very flesh can be a great poem. When you decide who you want to lead you, it should be a person who has a sense of adventure about the people they serve, a person who is curious, who looks at the people in their community and knows that they may not know the end of the story, but it can be magical if they put the bones together. I know in my life, it's not always easy to look at the pieces that feel like wreckage or debris along the beach, the pieces that feel like dead and dying bones. I don't always want to go there to find my meaning. I want my meaning to come in the sunny days, with a gentle breeze and the sound of the waves coming against the sand gently, but in truth, you get the best look at the bones after the storm. Can you turn your suffering into transformation? Yes. Can you turn your addiction and grief into the way that you connect with someone else? Yes. Can you turn isolation into community? Yes. But to do so, you have to pay attention to the storms and what you find after. You have to be a person who sees magic and adventure where other people just see bones. I know in my life sometimes I have trouble remembering that's possible, and so I need to reach out to friends. And maybe you do too. If you've lost a sense of adventure and curiosity about what's possible in your life, find someone you can trust who loves you deeply and ask them, what do you think I'm capable of? What are you curious about in my life, and where do you think there's magic left for me? The best kind of life that you can live is often not the one that's found in the calm days, in the sunny breeze, or with the blueprint and the easy answers. The country that we can build together does not yet exist. The outcome is uncertain, but it can still be magic. Can we make magic from the bones? Can we take the real pain of division in our country and retell that story? Can we look head on at the sins of our country's past, at the stain of racism or oppression, and retell that story until there is healing and justice and magic and adventure? Yes. Can our suffering, our loneliness, our trauma, our doubts be the bones that are reformed with the help of God and our imagination to have a living and magic life? Yes. Absolutely. But it requires you to dig, to run in right after the storm in your life or a country and look for the broken pieces, not to shy away from the bones or debris or the wreckage or the storm itself, but to know that all things, all moments, all people, all countries can be retold, put back together, until your life and this world is filled with more love than you ever imagined. May it be so, and amen.